This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? And this is a very exciting day. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm stoked. I'm looking forward to this.
I am really looking forward to this. When your info first came across my email, it was kind of one of those I got stopped in my tracks a little bit. And then as I have, just connected with you on social media and been reading your book, I'm like, you are my people. You're just my brand of person that I enjoy. And we have a common connection. Enjoy Egg Rich Read, which seems to be a common theme on this show. Is it just that I have a lot of people that know Joy, or does Joy just know a lot of people?
Or does she attract the similar kind of people who find each other?
Maybe it's that. Okay. So anyway, in any event, I'm so excited. Your new book, Hurt and Healed by the Church, is it's out now, right?
It comes out April 12th. So yeah.
April 12th. Yes. Yeah. So by the time that this airs, it will be, that's what I was trying to, I was doing the math.
Yeah, I'm doing the math going, it'll be out.
When we're recording.
We're time traveling right now.
We are time traveling. That's the fun thing.
The space-time continuum.
Yes, it is. Side note, quick digression. Have you ever seen the movie Interstellar?
Yes, I'm walking very slowly.
I know. Man, we could do a whole podcast about that and about how I have a lot of questions about the space-time continuum. But that's not what this podcast is about, Ryan.
Could be, but not today.
Okay, so... yes. So by the time this airs, your book is out, which congratulations. And so, but before we get into the topic and the story behind all of it, you got to give us the Ryan 101. So tell us who you are, what you do, how you got to where you are today.
So before I do that, I just want to say that if you're in a college that has a Ryan George 101, you're in one of two places. You're at Alabama and you're a quarterback and you're just keeping your grades enough to play. That's the only place that they're going to have. Or you're in an unaccredited institution where that paper means nothing. Maybe it'll be sued out of existence. Maybe it won't be there in 2 years. Either way, if there's a Ryan 101 at your school, you might want to think about transfer. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and all of us graduated from homeschool. You'll be able to tell that over the course of the next hour. I have 19 nieces and nephews. So I'm a pastor's kid. And I married a missionary kid 23 years ago. We're still married. And now she's the missions director at our church. Awesome. I'm the adoptive father of a future social worker. She's at Radford University studying right now. Actually, she just came home from spring break as we're recording. But when you're hearing this, she's at school. And then 21 years ago, I moved to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia and started a freelance practice that gives me a bunch. Hundreds of thousands of American Express points. And so I've gone to all 7 continents, both polar circles. I've camped in the snow in both the Arctic and the Antarctic. I've surfed in the Arctic.
Wow.
I travel the world. And so back in 2006, I started writing a blog about faith reconstruction, about what was going on inside of me. And as I started to travel, I started to see the connection between physical adventure and spiritual discovery. And so that became a blog, which became my last book. And then as in the process of writing that book, everyone who wanted to hear my story had questions about the story that's in my new book. And so, now I'm the author of 3 books.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Like I mentioned, as somebody who, I think I mentioned before this recording, as somebody who is in the process when we're recording this of releasing my first book, 3 makes me tired. So
it makes me tired. That makes 2 of us. At the
current moment, ask me in a couple months, but I've already had people be like, when's book 2 coming out? And I'm like, can I release book 1 for the love? In any event. So congratulations. That is incredible. But yeah, I would love for you, you told me a story before we started recording that I just thought was really cool. And I'd love for you to kind of tell that story here and maybe expand on it a little bit, because I think it's really powerful that, what ended up being this current book, Hurt and Healed, was a story. It's not that you were hiding it. I mean, it's not that you were hiding it, but you weren't out there like telling the story. It was just kind of a part of who you were. And if I'm wrong in any of this, you can be like, Molly, stop talking. You're wrong. I love being corrected. But it's more like, from what I kind of understood is that like you were doing all this other kind of work out there. You were putting, your other books out there, and you weren't really leading with this other piece of your life and piece of your story. And as you started to talk about that, people like Joy and Robin and other people that we were mentioning were like, wait a second. There's a book there. There's a book there. So can you tell that story? Because I think it's really, the reason I ask this question is not just because I think it's interesting, but two is I think that there are people listening, not necessarily that they have a book in them, but there's a piece of their life, a piece of their story that they maybe shield a little bit that actually can help people. So that's why that's the context under which I'm asking this. So go tell us that story.
Yeah. So I'll tell the end first, because it's easier to do it that way to explain why I wasn't telling the story. Is that
okay?
I'm the son of a serial sexual abusing pastor. We think maybe in multiple states. We definitely know multiple victims, some of which are very close friends of mine. And that's not a story that, when you see a name in the news, and I'm not going to name names, we all have different names that come to our head. We never hear from the families, and there's a reason, right? There's almost like a shame there to it. In fact, when some of the discoveries came out, my mom, I remember one of the first things she ever said to me is, how many people know my shame? Right. And so there's also a difference too, is that most of the people who are telling the story, and rightfully so, they should, are the female victims. When my agent was pitching different publishers and talking to Joy and whatever else, we realized I'm the first dude to write a book like this, to talk about the things that happen in a church that make abuse easier to get away with, easier to do in some cases. And so to tell the backstory, back in 2002, I got a phone call from my dad, who had recently officiated our wedding, right? So this is really awkward. And he goes, hey, I cheated on your mom with a 19-year-old. And that's how he described it. And I thought it was disgusting and gross and all those things. I was like, oh, my dad made a mistake, And then a decade later, my wife, who leads mission trips down in Nicaragua, they work with people coming out of the sex trade, trying to get out of it because they're being trafficked. And so when we take counselors down from the States or other parishioners who may have similar stories to be able to say, hey, I see you, your story's real, I want to help you. They do a pre-trip planning in our church to prepare people's hearts for that. And in one of those pre-trip plannings, one of my dad's victims said, yeah, this is my story. And it was Ryan's dad. And so this is a great honor. She asked me to go with her to confront my dad. And she said, I'm not ready to tell the story. And I told her, I said, I tell you what, I won't tell the story outside of like my Bible study group, like the guys that I'm accountable to, the people I'm doing life with, my counselor. I won't tell anybody that story until you're ready to tell. So that's another reason I haven't written about it. And then 6 years after that, we were home for family Christmas or some gathering at my parents. My parents have kids come over and swim, and we do Christmas. There's people that aren't related to us. It's a big, like I said, I have 19 nieces and nephews, 5 brothers and sisters and all their spouses. And there was 2 middle school girls there. And my dad was talking to them about how the women in Song of Solomon were praised for their body parts. And my wife overheard it on the other side of the door. And it was like red flag. And so she told the girls' parents, who didn't know what we knew about all the other stuff, right? Because again, we had held that story for the victim. And so they thought we just were mistaken. There's something we wouldn't know. And then 2 years after that, 2.5 years after that, my wife and I were in Belize on our anniversary. We come back, and there's a 2-hour-long episode on a Victims Advocate podcast, and they've got receipts on my dad. They've got letter written in his handwriting. They've got witnesses. They've got all kinds of stuff. And that was the 19-year-old my dad had claimed to, quote unquote, have an affair with. There was other things in it that were weird. Like in the 90s, I was doing, the cult that I grew up in was real big in door-to-door visitation. And I remember going door-to-door we lived on an island in Chesapeake Bay. And this lady came to the door on the other side of the screen, and we're like, hey, do you have a faith? Do you have a church? We'd love to invite you to ours. And she said, well, where do you go? And we told her, she said, oh, I would never go there. The pastor's having an affair. And my mom's like 6 inches to the left of me, And she says, no, that's my husband, I would know. And the lady looked through the screen door, says, well, ma'am, you don't know your husband. And we heard later that when one of the revelations came out early on, my mom's first response was, oh, not again, and this was the first victim that we knew about. So that means there's more than what we know. Like, I've moved around a lot. We were talking about before we record, I've lived in 8 states. We moved under some really odd circumstances when I was a kid. And like, there was a time when my parents were half of the Christian school teachers in this little tiny Christian school. And just in the middle of a school day, we up and moved out of state, and our church and a few affiliated churches paid my dad going away money for 18 months to start a new congregation, like in the middle of a school day, like stuff like that just never made sense and were never fully explained to me in a satisfactory way. And so I've only recently been able to put all those together. So that's part of the reason I actually started writing this book before we found out the last pieces. And I don't think they're the last pieces. People have seen me doing press early on and said, hey, when you get a chance, call me. I know more of the story. So I've got one of those phone calls coming up. So the sheriff's office is still investigating, and I got a phone call from a deputy detective, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. So we're still finding stuff out. And I felt I had enough of the story put together that I could go ahead with the book, because no matter how many more instances there are, the truths of the book apply regardless how many there are.
Wow. Well, let me just first say thank you for sharing this story and for your transparency in it. And I know that, while this is not my story, there's a lot of people here who, like, they either know somebody or they were involved in something like this. Like, there's just it feels like more and more stories of sexual abuse within the walls of the church are coming to light. Not that it's, happening more, but that it's finally coming to light. And so it's just, it's painful. This is a painful topic. And it's not a like fun topic that anybody wants to talk about. You don't, and for you, like, I can't, this is honestly the first question I have for you. And if at any time, if there's a question that I ask that you're like, I'm not okay with answering that, like, you can also tell me that as well.
You're good. Yeah.
But cause I understand, like, the tenderness of some of this and the honoring that you also want to do for the victims and things like that, and the families. And so, but I'm asking for you primarily, like, and I know that this is a big part of it, is that how have you navigated your relationship with your dad? Like, how did you navigate it immediately when you began to learn this stuff? And then how have you navigated it as you've, been going through this, and how are you navigating it now?
Wow. So that is it's a continuum. It's like recently you're talking to Shannon about how things are nonlinear. Like the way I think we've learned about my dad has not been linear. So at first I just was like, well, he's flawed. He makes mistakes. Then after that, after it started to be people that I care about coming forward, like friends of mine, like I was like, man, I've gone on vacation with that person, In fact, I was on vacation with her when my dad did one of the things. It's changed over time. I've prayed so many times for my dad. I've asked, dear God, would you help heal my heart as you heal his? Because he's still covering it up. He's still saying everybody is lying. He's still hardened. We gave him some boundaries. So after, I don't know, 2 of the revelations, we went up there to Maryland, and I just said, hey, listen, I have a teenage daughter and a wife, and I don't trust you around either of them. And so here's some boundaries we're going to put in place. And I said, Dad, there's a chance to reconcile if you want to get into counseling and therapy or recovery. If you confess your sins to your pastor, we gave him some really easy, low bar things to do. And he just said, I refuse to do all of it. And so over time, as more and more of these have compounded, more and more of my family has been willing to come on board with those boundaries, if you will, to where now my dad is blocked on my phone, my brother's phone, and probably my sister's too. And we don't attend family gatherings where he's there. He's just not a safe person. And so it has been interesting too. Part of the dynamic is, so my wife and I have known longer than most of my siblings by years, right? Because of the stuff that happened with a girl in our church. And so it's taken them different time to come to where we are. And we have to extend grace to them, extend grace to my mom, how she's still going through all this. She still lives in the same house, other side of the house, but same house with him, runs a business with him. Some of my siblings think that I'm being inappropriate by writing a book and telling my story. My mom definitely does. When my mom heard that I was working on this project, she said, well, that means Ryan was retroactively, he deserved to be abused. So my dad didn't sexually abuse me, but he hung me, he froze me, he beat me, he threw me, he threatened to knock my teeth out. He told me, you know, in the Old Testament, we'd have been allowed to stone you. So you should be thankful you're alive right now. A lot of shaming, especially religious language and stuff. But that I deserved all that now because I'm telling my story. And that was a cost I weighed. You know, that's the other reason it took me a while. It was probably 2-3 years of intense weekly therapy before I was willing to go public with it. And I went to my pastor and I said, hey, man, I want to tell my story. Is there a way to do this that's redemptive, that Jesus can use? And he said, can you do it and honor your parents? Is there a way to tell that story to honor your parents? And so I really did that. I paid for an extra round of editing, and each of the editors that I had in the process, I said, can you edit all angst out of my manuscript? I want to honor my parents. Can you help me do that? And praying over it, you know. And so even the process of writing the book has been changing my response to it, because while writing my book, I'm getting different letters from my dad or quotes. We've recorded almost every conversation with my dad for the last 5 years, 10 years, because each time the stories are different, and we just needed to have something to tell the other siblings. No, he admitted to this, or he didn't admit to that. It's been all over the board. On a good day, I pray for my dad. On a bad day, I'm glad he's not part of my life.
Man, well, first, thank you for answering that. There's such a tenderness there that I even heard and I felt as you were sharing that. And I actually know personally a couple people in my life who have similar relationships with their families. And that is like, it's like a compounding hurt when it's like you're not just hurt by the actions of this person or the actions of the church or whatever. It's like a compounding hurt because it's also your parent, like this parent, this person that like is supposed to be the person who, you know, loves you and cares for you and is your safe person. And then when that gets blown up, like how difficult and painful that is. And so, I don't know. I just feel like there's somebody, and I'm not somebody who usually says this, but like, I just feel like there's somebody listening to this right now who that is their story, where there's like a really painful relationship or loss with a parent, a mother or a father. And that, the hope that you shared there and how you talk about like how there are some days, like good days, you're praying for your dad. Then there are other days you're working on it, you know, like there's hope there, for somebody, and getting to that piece and getting to that place. Like what a beautiful, testimony that is. And
that's part of the tension that Jesus said, that to pray for your enemies, right?
Yes.
Is to go, you know, Jesus was on a cross, which is way worse than anything I'll ever have had done to me. And he's saying, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Yeah. And so there's this weird thing that you can love somebody and not approve of it. And you could have gone to them multiple times and given them multiple chances and just go, okay, I'm so thankful that the inventor of justice has this, because I don't.
Okay. So here's a crazy thing. And this is why I told you, I was like, sometimes these conversations go a direction that I didn't initially plan, but then a moment like this happens where you just bring this up. And I was actually going to read an excerpt from your book from a part that I had just, as soon as I read it, I was just like, this is beautiful. And I feel like this speaks exactly to what you're talking about right now. And this is like no lie. This is what I have it open to. So I have it proved.
I believe
that you said this before I picked this. Like what? Yeah, I just think God's really cool with stuff like that sometimes.
Yes,
so this is in chapter 16, Heaven Hath No Fury. And there were just a couple of paragraphs here that I wanted to read that just were really powerful. And I think it speaks directly to this. And you say, Jesus longed for a world of justice, or a return to shalom. He asked us to pray for life on earth to reflect that of heaven. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there will be no anger in heaven. We will all be 100% holy, and nobody will be yelling at us to keep it in line. Jesus knew and knows what modern social scientists have confirmed. Shame is a short-lived motivator. A jockey can go to the whip only so much. A coach who defaults to rage and alienates elite athletes, and his hyperbolic ranting eventually falls on deaf ears. The most skilled drill instructors don't need to torture their recruits constantly. As someone who was beaten for years with both shaming words and strong hands, I can tell you that bruised fruit is neither attractive nor sweet. I underlined that. I was like, ooh, that'll preach right there, Ryan.
Thank you.
People who study human behavior tell us that anger is a secondary emotion. We feel rage after we feel hurt, scared, rejected, humiliated, or frustrated. Outrage follows loss, pain, fear, loneliness, embarrassment, or a loss of autonomy. Cable news networks and social media algorithms are programmed to exploit this reality, to keep ratings and app usage up. They need to exacerbate outrage and to stoke the flames of argument. They show us stories and panel arguments about the topics that appeal to the negative emotions that eventuate in anger. And so those are the two paragraphs. Like before you were talking about like Jesus being a God of justice and like righteous anger and like, and being the God that can take our place in that. Like, just, I love that. What are the odds that was
so you're saying there's a chance?
I know. But I would love to sit in that for a moment, because I think that this is a thing that, we love to talk about there's so much about Christ's ministry. I mean, everything about Christ's ministry is just amazing.
Right.
But there's we love the resurrection. We love the healings and like the pretty things. We don't feel as comfortable sitting in the before, like in Saturday. Like right. Jesus is crucified on Friday, and then we got to sit in Saturday for a little bit, which is not fun.
Or even sitting in Friday.
Or even sitting in Friday, you're right. But like just the anger and the all of it, the darkness, the flipping of the tables, and Jesus like making a whip, just this kind of stuff. It's like not as pretty Sunday school.
Well, and I've had debates on different podcasts about that story of Jesus and the whip. I was interviewed by a Christian MMA fighter who uses that. He uses that to stay stoked in outrage, right? And I was like, no. You don't understand. That story is the exact opposite. One, that was a one-off. The gospel writers put it in different parts of each of their gospels, but it is a one-off. Two, he didn't deputize anybody and say, hey, go and do likewise, like he did other stuff. And three, this dude could Thanos snap and everybody's gone. So like if he was really wanting to take people out, like if it was about retribution, he could have made it way worse than snapping some chords.
Right.
And then you have to look at what was he angry about? It wasn't anything that you're going to see on ESPN or cable news network. It was that people were defiling the house of his dad. And I think we use it to get upset at a lot of other people that Jesus didn't get upset at.
Yeah. No, I'm telling you, that is right. That is that part right there, Ryan. Is that part right there. So I'm going through actually a study of the Gospel of John this year in my Bible study. And so we're just, we're spending 9 months just going through John slowly.
Dude, all right.
And,
First gear.
I love it. Obviously the Jesus flipping the tables like comes early in John, even though chronologically it's near the end of his life, but John has it kind of early in his ministry in the Gospel of John. And I just remember really sitting in that context of it, of thinking about the fact that like his anger is really directed at the religious, self-righteous people who have bastardized like his his father's house, just like you said. And it's like, and it was convicting of like, what do I do that maybe I'm not realizing? Like, am I taking the 12-foot 2x4 out of my own eye? Like, am I doing that? And like looking at, is there anything I'm doing where I'm making church about me, or I'm, and my comforts and my whatever it is? Cause like we all do that. But are we evaluating that? And it seems small, but it's the small things that then balloon into bigger things.
We want to be Jesus in that story, or maybe the disciples hanging out. We don't want to ask. I love that you ask. I'm on the other side of the table. What put me on the other side of that table?
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to ask more of those questions and less of the, hey, how can I be the hero in this story?
Right. Yes. We immediately default to how we can put ourselves as the hero in the story, when the reality is a lot of times we're the Pharisee in that story. And we don't want to say it. We don't want to admit that, but we are. And I was actually, as you were talking about the, even a little bit before, when you were talking about, the forgiveness piece, especially with all of this, with your, when praying for your dad and things like that, and like looking at how Jesus actually handled these situations. And I'll tell you also, my study of John this year has been so good. But a light bulb moment happened for me recently, in the telling of the Last Supper. And it was just something, I mean, as many times as I've like read the story of the Last Supper, heard the story of the Last Supper, like this particular piece had never occurred to me. And that was, and if it's occurred to you, you'd be like, yes, amen. Maybe it hasn't occurred to you either. So maybe it'll be a fun new thing for you.
It won't be first to either of us. So that's okay.
So, one thing I learned is that, so in the scene where, Jesus is talking about one of you is going to betray me. And he's referring to Judas, and he's washing Judas's feet, even amongst the fact that like, he knows this guy is going to betray him. And like his enemy is with him in the room plotting against him. And yet Jesus is serving him and loving him. But then, it's more of a private conversation between Jesus and John, when John's like, who is it? Like, it's not like Jesus is saying this to the whole table. And he says it, and he actually says it to John. And if you look especially at like the way historically, like they would have been sitting all together, like it just, he's not announcing this to the table. He's not like, the one that I hand this cup to is the one that is my betrayer. Like he's saying it in a private conversation to John. But here's the interesting thing that I learned is that traditionally speaking, when somebody, especially a religious leader or somebody who was well-to-do was hosting a dinner, the host would dip bread in wine and hand it to the most honored guest at the table.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And so what is Jesus doing there? He's dipping his bread in the wine and he's handing it to Judas. And so he's sending a message. Not only is he like, in a lot of ways, protecting Judas, but he's like flipping like on its head the fact that like his enemy is the one that he is making the most honored person at the table in that moment. And like, it made me start to think about like, would I do that? Like, would I do that for the person in the room that I can't stand, or is, just even annoys me? Or am I Judas? Like, would I sell out? Again, like that, asking ourselves that question of that. And so anyway, I went way longer on that than I intended to.
When you're preaching, preach.
I mean, but it's a powerful, powerful image. And I think it speaks so much to, especially what you were talking about in earlier and in this book about, Jesus's form of justice and Jesus's form of righteous anger is not ours. And so how we take the posture of Jesus while also like processing our human emotions and not like dismissing them, but not being ruled by them. Does that?
Well, and a lot of Christians too will say, well, what I have is righteous anger. Now,
I've made that mistake. I'll confess that.
Right. And I was like, well, the problem with that is, as a kid, I was taught the Romans road, like how you lead someone to Jesus, you take them through these verses, Romans. And the first one you start with is, there is none righteous, no, not one.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. That's why I love that line in the book about, because it dawned on me, there is no anger in heaven. Like, heaven will be the holiest place ever, forever, and in times past. And there's no anger there. And so I struggle. I work through the anger. I grind my teeth. There's times when I'm thinking about my dad and I look down and my jaw is tight and my fists are clenched and I have to say, God, help me open my hands. It's awkward. It's weird, right? As you go, well, I love my dad. I want him to change, but I also don't want my daughter in the room with him. Like, it's such a weird thing. I think Jesus too, in that moment, he knew that 24 hours later, Judas was going to hang himself. And I think there's pity there. Like, you can look at the person betraying you and go, oh, they're doing this because they're broken. They're doing this because this is who they think they are. This is what they think they have to do. And so I think Jesus has to have compassion on all of us, because he knew all the bad choices we were going to make before he made us, and made us anyway. So he just has a level that we'll never have. But for on earth to be as it is in heaven, we have to move more and more in that direction.
Yeah, I really love that perspective of the way to make earth here, as on earth as it is in heaven. Like, you've got to continually, little by little, step by step. It is not an overnight process. It's often years, decades, a lot of Jesus, a lot of therapy, a process of moving in that direction.
And it doesn't mean that we don't pursue justice. Like, there are a lot of churches who don't address it because they're like, well, everybody makes mistakes. And it's like, well, first of all, the difference between a mistake and a serial offense is two different things. Right. But it's like, what else there won't be in heaven? There won't be sexual assault. So like, Jesus is putting some boundaries around some people too for eternity. And so I'm not saying that my boundaries are eternal, or even that they're holy, or even that they're for everyone. They took a lot of prayer. We actually, as a family, those of us who did it, we fasted for like a month off and on. We had meetings and stuff. Like, we want to do this in a way that no one can say that is a wrong way to do it. Right. We want everybody to give us the benefit of the doubt. They won't, but we want to make sure that we're above reproach.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, we've touched on it briefly, but I realized that we haven't actually dug into your specific religious upbringing. That, obviously we've talked about kind of the story of your dad, but the reality is like, I don't think we've even mentioned the words IFB. And so, which is kind of like, a little bit more known now because of the Shiny Happy People documentary, which I didn't love, if I'm going to be honest. Okay. I felt like it was a little, I don't know. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay.
You actually don't have to share your thoughts on it.
No, that's fine.
But basically, for anybody who isn't familiar about independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and the teachings of Bill Gothard and the connection there and all of that, and the fact that your father was an IFB pastor. And so you grew up kind of and you mentioned the word cult. And so for people that don't know that, can you kind of give us actually that piece of the foundation of this story? Because I do think that's an important piece.
Sure. Yeah. One of the many red flags that identifies a cult as being separate from a healthy religious environment is an authoritarian situation where there is one person or there's a group of one person. So like in the independent fundamental Baptist churches, the most important letter is I, independent. None of those pastors are accountable to anybody else. And then each of those congregations, I mean, we heard one here in your state, North Carolina, a couple of weeks ago, the guy saying, hey, if a girl's wearing shorts, he's going to let off the rapist, because his victim was wearing shorts. That guy was an independent fundamental Baptist. Like, those are things that were said. There was a very famous IFE pastor who said that for every man who goes to jail for rape, in the next cell over should be the half naked woman that he took advantage of. And that type of authoritarian, I make the rules and I use Bible verses to back it up, is pervasive. It's like, that's what you do to get in, right? So the IFB believes that it's almost like King Arthur, that these guys have this call, and if they pull the sword out, they call it the man of God role, then what they say goes. And there's no elders, there's no accountability, and no woman is allowed to ever say anything. And so I was not in the Duggars specific cult. I did do training with Bill Gothard. My dad ascribed to a lot of it. I remember Bill Gothard materials on our shelves. My parents even considered his homeschool curriculum. Thankfully, they didn't go that direction. But I recognize a lot in Shiny Happy People of the principles that we lived by, and the dynamics of what church is, what family is, what good Christianity is. You define yourself almost like an asceticism. Like I'm a better Christian than you because I don't do X, Y, and Z. Even to the point, like there's pastors in the IFE movement that will get up and preach against open-toed shoes versus closed-toed shoes, right? Like there was an IFE pastor on our campus that said that not only did they couldn't wear pants, but their skirts had to come at least to the ankles, because if a woman wore a dress that came to her knees, her legs as a visual line would draw people to her crotch. And so that was immoral. And this guy was a leader on our campus. And we had this, I'm telling you, I put it in the book. I did the math. I think it was like 1,600 sermons I heard in 4 years at college or something like that. And this is it's inundated to us. Like if you don't read out of a King James Bible, you can't even be a Christian, not even a good Christian. You can't even be a Christian. There's just crazy things that, like at my college, I went to this tiny cult college, and at certain hours of the day, guys and girls couldn't be on the same sidewalks, and we never were allowed in the same elevator. Like they just had, I think they knew that the tendency of isolation that all these IFE pastors have leads to assault. And so at least it's not going to happen in the elevator, right? I had to use a separate stairwell if I went upstairs from my girlfriend, now wife. There were so many things they put as protections. And of course, behind those walls, they're doing all kinds of ungodly stuff to people. But it's this authoritarian, like nobody can tell me what to preach. Nobody can tell me what to do. If I get found out, I'll just pray in front of you. My dad did that to one of the victims right after he assaulted her. He prayed right in front of her, says, look, God just forgave me, so now you don't need to tell anyone. So they layer abuse with Christianity, right? With the Bible, they use theology as a weapon. And that's the real premise of my book, is to say, listen, these things aren't exceptions to the rule. This is the natural outcropping, the natural result of believing this type of theology. And so the chapter by chapter through the book, as you've read, I addressed one thing. So anger, the fact that anger can be holy, or whatever going on through the line. And I basically show that most of the problems that we're coming up against now and all these news stories, it goes back to what they believe about Jesus, God, and the Bible.
Man, there's so many times that you were saying stuff that I was just like, what on earth? Like, how do we get to this place? Like, how do we get to this place where these are things that are not only espoused, but like deeply held convictions where... Yeah,
to the point that you're not even going to heaven. Like if you read out of a different Bible than me, you can't go to heaven.
And I just, and that, yeah. You know, as somebody who didn't grow up in the church, like I didn't become a Christian until I was 25. And so like, as somebody who, you know, was in the kind of the opposite end of that, but like, and learning the gospel and reading the Bible as an adult and getting to know Jesus, the Son of God, the creator of the universe, like this just the most amazing, kind and strong and just everything almighty and powerful being who also humbled himself and, you know, took on the form of a human that he didn't have to take, and but came to earth to show us a better way to live in the upside down kingdom of God. I just wrestle and struggle so much with like, how are people reading the same Bible? How are they doing this? And I know that there's like that's a nuanced question. Like you know, a lot of the times they're not, or they're not reading the same Bible or whatever.
But it's a natural human thing to wrap your theology, to wrap your politics or whatever around your own experience.
Yes. It's just, but man, it is like dumbfounding to just sit here and be like, wow. So if I show my toes, like. What in the world? Oh my heavens. Okay. Well, so obviously there's a whole lot to this. You wrote a whole book about it.
Right.
But the part that I've been really wanting to get to too, and I think we've properly laid the foundation at this point, is the fact that here you are today, on this beautiful sunny day at the time that we were recording this, and when the time that this releases,
hopefully,
you are still attending church, and you have reconstructed your faith. There's a lot of different terms that get thrown around about the deconstruction and reconstruction, and just, but I think in a lot of ways, it's you've come to a place where your faith is now your own, and it is separate from your upbringing and your dad and all of it. It is now yours and yours alone. But that is a unique story, unfortunately. Is that more often than not, we see people that grew up in contexts like yours or have had experiences of abuse within the church, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual or sexual abuse, who leave the faith altogether. And that is not your story. And so I would just, I want to know, because I think this is, I'm fascinated, but also like, and I know you obviously talk about this in the book as well, but I want you to share this with us, is how has this journey been for you? And what was it? Was it any one in particular thing? Or was it just like, even throughout all of this, you were like, I'm not letting go of Jesus. I'm not letting go. Where did that land for you?
Before I answer, I just want to say that for those who haven't reconstructed, right, they've just walked away. I get it. Like, there's nothing in my book that would condemn them, that would say that they don't know better, that would say that I have something all figured out. If I was hurt in any other institution, so like if something horrible happened to me at the YMCA, I don't think anybody would have a problem the fact that I would never work out at the YMCA again, right? Like that makes total sense. My counselor says something on a regular basis. She says, wounds from relationships are only healed in relationships. And I've gone another step on that. She's not signed off on this. I don't even know if she knows I'm telling people this. That I think that wounds from the church can only be healed, not necessarily in a church building, but by people who also love Jesus, right? Like,
I would agree with that.
Because what I had to find was the real Jesus. There's this weird thing that nobody wants to talk about in the gospel. Maybe they do, and I'm just pontificating, but everybody was drawn to Jesus on every end, male, female, Roman, Jew, religious, non-religious, young, old. Every end of every spectrum was intrigued by Jesus and found him winsome and attractive and intriguing, and just they wanted to be around him. Massive crowds before PA systems, before social media. Imagine, your entire city getting up and hiking for 3 days to follow somebody that you just heard about 20 minutes ago. That's the Jesus I wanted.
Physically attractive. That's like
that's
the
what they
other
said.
Yeah.
Yeah. This wasn't Chris Hemsworth, or John Cena at the Oscars. Yeah. No, but I was like, I want to find that Jesus. And the way I found him was twofold. One, Jesus promised, hey, if you want to find me and you seek for me with your whole heart, I promise you'll find me. So that's a promise to hold on to when you're like, I know if Jesus is real and if what he was in the Gospels is the one that we're going to follow, I can ask him to reveal that. But the other is I intentionally sought out relationships. I kept looking. You do too. We live in a Bible Belt town, right? There's, I think 300 churches in my town. I was like, somebody here has to know the real Jesus. And I found people whose lives, I was like, that's what I want my life to look like. That's what I want. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where you see somebody looking at their spouse and you're like, oh man, I wish my wife or my husband would look at me like that. Or you see how someone's interacting with their kids or whatever. You're like, that's the life I want. Or their grandkids come running home, or their kids like can't wait to come home for Christmas. It's like, that's the kind of parent I want to be. And that's kind of how I was with finding people who follow Jesus, whether they were in a church building or not, going, they have that's it right there. And then being very curious about it and being open. And I was so thankful that a lot of them were very honest about how they got there, and that not straight, not linear path to get there themselves. And so over time, I've just pulled this circle of souls around me. I've got guys in my Wednesday night group. I started a parachurch organization. There's like depends on the night, 4 to 6 different churches represented by the guys around the fire. We're talking about our life. We read through, right now, reading through the book of Mark, praying over each other, daring each other to do great things for God. And I've got guys there from 17 to 80 years old. And it's just amazing to go, that dude's 22. He said, I don't know enough. I want to be around this 80-year-old guy. And you watch an 80-year-old guy put their hand on his shoulder and pray over him. You know, it's like, that's what I want. I want the Jesus that everyone actually wants. If he's real and if he's going to be a part of our life, I haven't figured him all out. I don't have myself all figured out, but I know who the real thing is.
Man, that I feel like is so my kind of what attracted me to him too, was like, you know, my just briefly, my knowledge of Jesus pre 25 was, you know, based on the interactions that I'd had with people who claimed to be Christians. And like, one of the most shaping events of my life was when I had a friend in elementary school who was like my best friend. And I actually do tell this story in my book. But she was my best friend in elementary school. We were friends for a few years. She was in a really strong Christian family. Like we were, you know, we did the sleepovers and all the things. Like we were best elementary school friends. You know, like how those friendships, especially in the early years, like really shape you. And in my, when I was in 5th grade, we were in PE together, and she basically said, it was like a rainy day. So we were doing PE inside with like the rainbow parachute, you know, with the balls. And, you know, it was like,
we didn't have those in homeschool, but I understand what they are. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay.
I do know what you're talking about.
Rainbow parachute. That was like the best day in PE, which by the way, side note, my husband says was not the best day in PE. And that is the biggest disagreement in our marriage. But anyway, so he, you know, she pulls me aside and she says, "Hey, I need to talk to you. We're in 5th grade." And I was like, "Okay." And we sit down in this little side room off the gym, and she says, "I can't be friends with you anymore." I said, "Why? Why can't you be friends with me anymore?" Like, what do you mean you can't be friends with me anymore? And she said, "You're not Christian enough for me." And and that's like a direct quote. That's one of those things that is etched in my brain forever.
You'll never get that off the hard drive.
I will never forget that. And then that was the last time we ever spoke. Like we've never really communicated after that. And it would devastated me because this was like, like a kid, like I did everything with, and I was devastated. And it shaped me. And that was kind of one of those things where I was like, well, if that's what the church is about, like if that's what Christians are, like, I don't want any part of that, you know? And so, but when I, you know, then fast forward many, many years, when I get to a point of being at complete and total rock bottom, you know, I was like, it was a last ditch effort. I walked into the doors of a church and I was like, well, this doesn't work. I'm out. But I remember very quickly, like the people that I met initially, just even walking through the doors, to the worship music and the message and all of it, like there was a genuineness about it. And I remember thinking like, I want to know that Jesus. I want to know, like, I want what he's having. Like, I want what, you know, that's, I mean, like really,
when Harry met Sally, you're like, I want that right there.
I want that right there. I mean, but it was a powerful, like it was contagious in a really healing way. And that's what I ended up finding. And so I think that's been my passion so much over the last, you know, almost 14 years of walking with Jesus. Like I want other people that don't know him to feel that too, or have been hurt by the church. And I'm like, that's not Jesus. Like, I'm sorry that really broken people hurt you. I'm really sorry, but that is not Jesus. And this is the point that I might get controversial. And you can actually even disagree with me. Because I think, yes, the church, like the Big C church, has done some stuff, as we have heard throughout this conversation and all about. However, I think the Big C church as a whole gets roped in with that. And it makes me sad because I think that that's not actually the majority of churches, but because the broken systems and abuse and things within some churches get louder we're not hearing about the stories of actually what really beautiful stuff is happening in the local church, like the healing that's happening. Like, I mean, so I'm involved in a church plant, which I talk about a lot here on the podcast, but you know, I've seen the most like I have seen firsthand what the church looks like when the church is running towards Jesus and the way that the church should be running. Like, not just the love for one another, the care for community, but healing, miracles, prayer, like hard conversations, confronting sin when it's not fun or comfortable, like dealing with the hard stuff in a really beautiful and redemptive way. And actually, I don't tweet very much, but I actually tweeted this a couple weeks ago because I was like, you know what? Like, I had just kind of felt discouraged. I was like, I just feel like all I'm seeing lately is all that pastors are doing wrong, all that churches are doing wrong, all of the ways that Christian leaders are failing. And I'm like, look, I'm not denying that stuff is happening, but can we also... Can we live in a world of both and, like, not either or? And can we also highlight the good and the beauty? And so I said, if your church is doing something really amazing, or tell me something good that's happening. And the stories, Ryan, that started pouring in of, like, you know, I lost my mom last year and people showed up at my doorstep every day for 2 months with meals and mowing my lawn and, like, just caring, caring for the widows, caring for the orphans, providing, reaching across the table with other religions. Like, I mean, just the beautiful picture. I'm like, that is what the church is about. And I want to amplify those stories while also acknowledging the heart of the other. I struggle with the people who feel like it has to be either or, and we can't talk about the both and I just went on a complete moment here, Ryan, forgive me. But it just, oh man, I love what you were talking about. And I feel like it's so healing for people, and
yeah, there's Andy Stanley says it this way. He says, some things aren't problems to be solved. They're tensions to be managed. And so I think it's going to be a tension, particularly in American church. I think it's so funny. We tend to say Big C church. We think American church. And I have so many friends that are working in other countries and worshiping Jesus in other cultures. We used to go to a church that had 14 different nationalities in it. I've had guys from different parts of the world in my Bible study. And I would say the American church, all churches have something wrong with them because all of them have people in them. But especially the American church. But at the same time, I don't know. Some Sundays one's the exception to the other, and it depends on who you're talking about. So I'm going to be real candid here. While we're talking, they're having staff meeting at my church. And my wife told me before she left, she was one of the people in the know for the announcement they're making. There's a guy who was a lay leader in our church, very prominent. People see him on Sundays, got caught stalking a college co-ed in our church where people can come forward. Now, they did all the right things. It's reported, all of that. You know, we handled it the best way we know how. As soon as we knew anything, we did something, and that something was good. And that's also the same church where Sunday I had a guy crying at my table, said, our church, we don't have pews. We're at tables. And so the pastor gets up for 10, 15 minutes, sets it up. Then we do Bible study. Then we go back and we do worship as a big group. But our big area, like the big room, the auditorium, is tables and has been for several years. And there's a guy who doesn't know Jesus yet at my table, was crying, saying, today, he's 60, 61 years old. He said, today is the first day of my life I connected these two things in my life because of that, what we're talking about. So that happened in the same building, 50 feet apart, right? And so there is this tension there to go, beauty and pain can happen in the same life. I can be an advocate for people and hurt people at the same time. Like I can't just look at the church and say, may that tension be solved. I have to look at my own. I have said things to my wife that are inappropriate, right? I have not been there when my daughter needed me in certain times or whatever it is. I can hurt other people. I know I've offended other people for sure. And it's this tension to be managed. At the same time, I don't want my dad to have another victim, and I don't want more of my dads out there. And so there's this thing that you go, so the way I personally approach this, and you'll see this now that we're friends on social media, is most of my posts are talking about the beauty that I'm finding, the connection, the spiritual transcendent moments where I just go, holy moly, like the moment earlier while we were recording, you're like, I can't believe you brought this up. This is the page I have turned to in my book. I point out those moments and also say enough is enough. And I think Jesus did the same thing, right? Jesus was the one who healed a whole bunch of people and met with Nicodemus at night and then still walked into the temple and said, get your crap out of my Father's house.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And, you know, and I think it goes back to even like full circle to what one of the things we were saying at the beginning of the conversation about, like, so often we want to see ourselves as the disciples or Jesus in the, like, we want to see ourselves as the hero, like as the righteous person, when it's like, no. Actually, more often than not, we're the Pharisee that Jesus is mad at, or we are the person who is in the temple, you know, that he's got to flip a table over for, or we are Judas and we are betraying, Jesus, or we're betraying somebody we love, or whatever. Like, but it's a whole lot easier to make ourselves the hero of the story than the villain. But I think that is where, and I think that's what we're seeing is when you do that hard work, that inner spiritual work, that is where the growth really happens. We talk about this all the time. Like, just any change is going to be hard. You're going to have to like grunt, and you're going to have to work through it. You're going to have to wade through mud, or you're going to have to lift heavier weights or whatever it is. Like, you're never going to be able to change. It's not going to be easy no matter what it is.
We have a saying at our church all the time, particularly when we're in a table setting or like around a fire or whatever. It was ingrained into me as a lay leader, is give people the gift of going second. So you go deep first, you confess first, right? You point out, yeah, Peter fell in the water, but he got out of the boat while I was still in there, or whatever the thing is, right? To go. Yeah. And if I say, and I do this online, I confess my own sins online, definitely in small group settings, so that I'm not confessing somebody else's. I can't remember. I think it's N.T. Wright that I quoted in the book. He says, if we don't confess our sins, we'll confess someone else's. And so if we, instead of pointing the finger there, if we first start by saying, God, forgive me, I'm a sinner, like the guy in the temple you pointed out, he's like, that's the dude right there, not the Pharisee publicly praying, the guy over here. If we start with that humility, you go, man, I'm messing up this thing. So when I pray for my dad, I have to start and say, God, please forgive me for not forgiving. Like, help me to forgive my dad like you forgive my dad. Also, help me want my dad to be as healed as you want my dad to be healed, right? Like, so you have to start with yourself, or it can spin in some very horrible places. You become a bomb thrower, you're just throwing grenades. I don't ever want to be that. I want to be the person that confesses first, so that people go, oh, that's the real thing. And then maybe I should consider what else he's talking about.
Man. Oh my gosh, Ryan, this is such a good conversation. This is so powerful. And we have completely run out of time. But man, Ryan,
I figured that would happen.
I know, but I like all of a sudden I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh. But no, this is, that's, it's a good sign.
That's right.
Man, well, I probably just means I'm going to have to have you back on. All right, Ryan. So you're stuck.
You know where to find me. We only live like 2 hours from each other.
I know. And then you're going to come visit my house next time that you fly out of Raleigh-Durham International Airport.
Which is my favorite domestic airport, by the way. You guys have a stellar airport.
It is a good airport. It is a good airport, especially, and you probably only ever go out of Terminal 2, because especially if you're doing international stuff. But Terminal 1 is like basically just Southwest. It's like, I have TSA pre-check. And so like, if I have a flight, I'll just be like, I could show up like 15 minutes before boarding and be like, zoop, zoop, zoop. Like, it's glorious. Now, there definitely have been times where RDU has made me not so happy, but that's very, very rare considering how often I travel. So yeah, it's a great airport, and it's a great area, and you're going to come to the farm and you're going to hang out, and we're going to continue to be friends.
Feed some chickens.
I know. Yeah, I know. Right now, my chickens are all about, and there was a rooster that was crowing while we were recording that I kept having to turn my mic down so that you didn't hear rooster crows throughout this entire thing. And then also, I'm just going to call it out because I have no idea if this actually is going to show up on the recording or not, but my dog, who is always in my office when I record because she's at my feet at all times, but she's 16, And she has been snoring loudly the entire time.
I haven't heard it, but that's hilarious.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, so funny story is you mentioned the interview with Shannon Lako that I did. So funny story is I had to edit that so hard because something got messed up in it had recorded part of the conversation like through my computer and not through my mic. And in any event, you could hear Tater crying, snoring the entire podcast. So like the entire conversation you hear.
See, I like that. Back when I used to have a podcast, I recorded different adventures that I met around the world. And we recorded one hanging 90 feet off the ground at night in Colorado. And you're hearing like crickets and whatever. But my favorite one for background noise, I interviewed a river guy that I've done a lot of my big whitewater stuff with. And we took the chairs and put them in a local river. And we put this recording equipment on one chair, him on one chair, me. And I interviewed him the whole time with the mics. And you're hearing the creek.
See,
the river running the whole time.
That I would do. 16-year-old dog snoring, not as
but see, that's home.
Majestic.
That's home. You're inviting people into your home. That dog's going to be there.
Yeah, she is. We joke. I think I've said this on the podcast before. We joke that like when the rapture happens or like the apocalypse or whatever, what's going to be left is Tater and cockroaches. Like she is indestructible. She's
102 in human years, so that's
just a million years old. And there have been so many times throughout her life where my husband and I have been like, that's it, like this is gonna kill her, and it doesn't, and she somehow is still walking. Like she has got the things that she's eaten, the things that she's killed, the things that she has gotten into.
Does she have a pocket full of Werthers too? I mean, that sounds like right up her alley.
I know. The worst. I mean, she got into a lot of things, but the worst actually was when this was like over a decade ago. We had gone out to dinner and we came home and she had climbed up on the counter of our kitchen. She had pulled down an entire brand new bottle of prenatal vitamins. She ate every last prenatal vitamin. It was 120 prenatal vitamins.
Oh my God.
And I was like, she's going to die. Like, that's not, I mean, like for a dog to have that much like iron and I don't know, whatever that's in prenatal vitamins. And then, I mean, it was like, I was convinced she was going to die. She didn't die. I have no idea. I mean, she threw up a lot, but she... Anyway.
I was about to say, did she go find every other male dog in the neighborhood?
No, she threw up. We had that incident. We had to buy a new couch. We had to throw a couch out because she had destroyed it so much. Anyway, that's more information than anybody wanted to know about Tater, but this is what we do here on this podcast. That's why we call it Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder, because sometimes we just go off on a tangent that doesn't make any sense. But it's my show, so I do what I want. Right. Ryan, this has been an absolute honor and a pleasure. For people that would like to stay connected with you, and obviously everybody go get this book, Hurt and Healed by the Church, Redemption and Reconstruction After Spiritual Abuse by Ryan George. You can get it Amazon, everywhere, all the places. How can people best stay connected with you and all those things?
Yeah, so probably Instagram. I'm at Ryplane, RYPLANE. I go out in the wings of biplanes. That's one of the fun things I do while they're doing aerobatic maneuvers. So that's my Instagram handle. All my contact information is at booksbyryan.com. You can find links to audiobooks, ebooks, all of the above. That's the easiest way to find me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for being here. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the healing that you're helping a lot of people experience.
Hopefully so. Thanks for having me.